Good afternoon, everybody. We will move forward with the Human Resources Committee meeting for September 2018. First on our agenda is the staffing report. A lot of activity with school ramping up. Mr. Swirsky, anything you'd like to share with us on that?
On here, there's some new appointments. You'll see a lot of action going on in the non-certified area. They're in here if their hours have changed or their number of weeks have changed. Their position might have changed for their location, so that's why you're seeing, these are not necessarily new hires in this group. A lot of them are returning, but they're just might be in a different location or a different position.
All right, any questions on the staffing report?
Okay.
We will move on then to item number 2. We have 3 placeholders for contracts. The first one being for integration specialists.
I did have and I just sent this out today at about 2:20. I had a couple of requests that came in. I did send out the job description for the integration specialists. So you should have that at least electronically. Some of the, it was a pretty good negotiation considering we started from scratch. They were non-bargaining and we came up with a whole contract. In my feelings, I guess it went really well, and I think we worked really cordially together. Just so you're aware of, in their base year, there was no increase. That was last year's salary that we used to set the base, and then it was 2 and 2 after that. What's in this contract, and it's not different from other contracts we have, but just so everybody kind of understands, in their steps that they have, they don't necessarily move a step every year. They may move a step, they will, other than their first year when they move a step, all the other steps are every 2 years. So even the existing integration specialists who will be going into a new spot for this year will not move again another step for 2 years. So.
Member Oswald.
On the job description at the top where the pay grade assignment, is that going to be changed now that we're going to be authorizing?
Yes.
And,
yep.
And it'll have the accountable for job titles in there too?
They'll have their new,
okay.
Their new group on there.
And I know we're currently hiring somebody. Will that be adjusted for this current hire?
Yeah, I think what we're doing is, not that we're trying to be so assured of this, we're trying to hire them into where these ranges were on here versus what the other ranges were.
Okay, thank you.
And this will be effective as of July 1 of this year, so we will have some retro on this.
Member Trinka.
Thanks. I just have 2 quick questions. Are all the integration specialists included in this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And then this is just a HR education moment for me. Looking at the collective bargaining contract on page 8, when it talks about leave of absences, it talks about, it specifically uses the words, I think this is with maternity leave or paternity leave, it uses the words mother and father. Is there anything that we need, any additional language we should consider about being more inclusive?
Are you in parental leave? Is that?
Yep.
Yes, that's a good point. That is kind of older language. We do have people, and some of those parental leaves applies to adoption in that also, and same-sex relationships and marriages. So it's yes.
Well, it's not even, I don't even see it just about same-sex marriages, but about people who don't subscribe to the 2.
Yep.
So if we could look at some additional language to be more inclusive and then utilize that moving forward in other contracts too, please. Thank you.
Member Lafayette.
Yeah, can you, how many integration specialists do we have right now, and how many are we still?
I believe there are, I had this number too before that, but I believe there's about 11 or 12, and I think we have one open position that I think we just filled what we just offered, so.
And did we have a number of returning, I mean, how long have some of the folks been in?
Oh, actually, we've had, there's one or two members that have been in there almost since the inception of the integration specialists. We actually had, I know one went into teaching this year out of the group, and we had one other, I thought we had two people that made a change, but I can't remember who this, one for sure. Yeah.
And where is the position that or is there some holes not being met because we don't have that one position filled right now?
We hired an individual for the full-time position at Lowell, and we have a half-time position now that we are in the middle of screening applicants for, and we have some external applicants on that are qualified, and so we will be doing interviews on those shortly.
Okay, great, and thank you. It's been great to see this process with this first contract, and really appreciate the work you've done with them.
Member Lowfall.
Kind of along the lines as Member Trinket too, it's kind of like human resource education. But so does the integration dollars come out of our general fund, much like our contracts, or is this a special allocation from special pots of money, grant money?
Right now, about 99.9% come out of a special grant fund that is applied for every year. I do believe we do have one position that they want an integration specialist, but they're using other funding for. It's not a full-time, it might even be this. Yeah, it might even be the 0.5 position.
And then just a follow-up, is there a certain way we place them with buildings? Like where do we know and where are they placed? Is that a principal's decision to advertise and open up a position within their school? How do we place them and the need for them?
Sounds like a good spot for me to jump in. I did want to clarify a little bit on the grant. This is achievement and integration dollars, and we apply for that every 3 years. And so we have a 3-year plan that we're in the process of right now. These positions are housed and staffed through the Office of Education Equity. And so when there's an opening, it is the Office of Education Equity who would post it and screen and then place the people in different buildings. We've had a few different models over the years where they weren't necessarily in one school but followed a caseload. And then we found that it just it was a little bit easier for everyone if they were just in one building and then served the students in that building. So that's the model that we're currently on, with the exception of some people who might be shared between a couple of buildings, and helping students to transition to a new building where if they were going from my caseload to your caseload, I might come for an initial meeting to do some introductions and help smooth things along.
Member Trinket.
One more HR education opportunity. Page 14, under the duration. If they want to modify the agreement, it would start on July 1st, and they have about 2 months. How often, what's the desired time period where you want to begin renegotiating a contract?
So like when this contract ends, is what you're talking about? It would be within that last year of this agreement. So at some point in my guess is 2019 going on to 2020, we'd probably sit down and have a conversation. It'll be interesting to see many times in a lot of our contracts, and we have right now, we've got to. They all ended up at one point, so we did like 11 contracts and one non-bargaining, group, and then the individuals this year. But now we have some 3 years and 2 years and 4 year contracts, so we can spread them out. But ultimately what people want to see or what the teachers are settling for, because they don't want to shortchange themselves by going too soon, and that's how we got into that other cycle. So it'll be interesting to see how this transpires from this point.
Member Sanstead?
Yeah, I was wondering where the grant money comes from. Is it state funds? Okay, and how long have we been receiving the grant? How many cycles? Guess is good enough.
I would have to look into that, but I'm guessing probably 20 years at least.
It's a long-standing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to comment on the negotiations and timing, for future thoughts, I'm glad that this is a 2-year. I'm still uncomfortable with the 4-year contract that we approved last year in terms of length, and so I appreciate seeing 2 years, and I think that it would probably be wise for us, given uncertainty of future budgets, to get us more on a 2-year model for everybody, where we're doing half the contracts every other year. Just a suggestion.
Superintendent?
Just a point of interest on the grant. I believe it was 5 or 6 years ago, the amount was about cut in half. And so it's been decreasing, and we advocate for this important funding to continue each year. So maybe contacting you with the opportunities to speak with legislators on this topic.
Member Lopal?
So what do we call this grant when we're referring to it with our legislators? So that
It's achievement and integration.
Seeing no further questions, we'll move on to the contract.
I have one more. One more. Sorry, that's okay.
Your light's hiding behind your computer.
I recognize from negotiations that the parties may come with wanting a 4-year contract or a 3-year contract, and so it varies with the language that the negotiating team brings to you. So just out of curiosity with this one, did they start at a 2-year contract, or did they?
I'm trying to think, because we started with a base year, we did not go longer than that, and I think that was just something we mutually, came up with. It was.
Yeah, and that makes sense with a new contract, but okay, thank you.
All right. We will move on to the Public Relations Coordinator contract.
In this contract, I did receive an email too, this contract was on the committee agenda actually a year ago. And this contract is tied to the non-certified business unit, which had not settled at that time. In fact, I went back and looked at the date that one was settled on. We signed off on it at the December school board meeting for the non-certified business unit. And so it was taken off at that time and just kind of set aside, and we're bringing it back up now. Even at that time, nothing's changed from the time we brought it forward to now. The only thing that's changing on this contract at all are the dates for the contract and the wherever the new amount is. And I did send a sheet out. It'll look like this. And this is the non-certified business unit, and then where that location is, where it's tied to on this position. The question also came up, like, if we have everything going with the non-certified, why don't we just put this position in the non-certified business unit? And I don't have a real good answer for that, other than in some of the conversations when this initiated, if there were ever any other issues with those units or any kind of disruption, this is a position they wanted to act and operate more independently than tied to a unit. And that's about the best I can come up with. But that's what it was when it was first initiated. So.
Member Sanstead.
I felt like there was some discussion last year too about looking at a more comprehensive communication strategy at the district level when this came up, and that might have been some of the board discussion about why this contract didn't get pushed through initially. I don't know if you have any recollection of that, Member Oswald, but not with regard to Ms. Kaufman at all, but that has been a concern that I've had over the last few years of participation on the board, is our kind of lack of a greater communication strategy as a district. And so I would reiterate my desire to see more of a plan in place for that, because having all of our communication vested in one person who has a lot of other duties isn't the best strategy for us at this point. So I would love to see more on that, which is beyond the scope here, but.
I can't see your light if you have it on.
So to Chair Kirby here. I actually wanted to just, I guess, make a comment that I certainly will be supporting this contract, and I greatly appreciate all of the work that Katie Kaufman has done, and I've seen, both being on the board now for 6 years and then as a parent in the district for 25, just the development that's happened around communication in the district, and have sat down myself with Katie at different times and know the relationships that she's developed out in the community to get feedback. And so I guess want to make note of that and say I really appreciate the work that she has been doing, and I thank you, Katie, while you're here with us for it. And I really, it's been great to see, I guess, the advancements I've seen as a parent in the district around the way we're communicating. And is there room for improvement? Of course there is, for anything that we do, but want to recognize that while we're talking about Katie's contract. Thank you.
Member Lofald.
Just want to piggyback off of Member Loeffler-Kemp that what we can do with only one person in our communication department is phenomenal. And I go to Member Sandsted's comment, though, that I don't want to lose track either of, and we talked about this in smaller sessions as well, that one of our needs in our community is to have more communication. It doesn't mean more visit. It means we need to reach out and have a bigger staff, which takes money, I know, and another contract. But Katie does well with the direction the board and the leadership has given. But boy, as a board member, I'd like us to spend more than $50,000 in a communication budget for things that we could do to help our community know us better.
Missing anybody? Okay. Next, we have one more contract to discuss. It'd be for the CFO.
Again, I sent out in the communication piece, I know we had some comparisons to previous contracts, individual contracts, and I tried to point out some of the differences with this one than the others. They're all, again, they're not so far apart, but there were some differences, and some of it depends on how the negotiations are going and what the needs of the individual are versus, and that was true of some of the other contracts also, so there were differences that way.
Any questions on that?
I have one.
And I just wanted to add too, because this brings up, Member Trinko, your question to me. These individual contracts we are required to discuss them and talk about them in a public setting, such like this. So there isn't a confidentiality, to them that we can't talk about.
So I have a question around the duties piece. Is it allowable, feasible, practical for us to codify in the employment agreement that one of the duties is to Their primary duty is to have a budget for us in a timely fashion.
Are you talking about in terms of like in their job description or in their...
Well, or in their duties in the employment agreement, because the duties are pretty vague. And so I'm struggling with understanding how we would necessarily consider termination with cause if that isn't codified. With the exception of egregious violations.
I believe it is in the job description now, where it wasn't before.
Okay.
Member Sanstad.
I'm just looking at the duty section too. I think that perhaps do we refer to the job description anywhere in here? It doesn't appear to be in the duty section. I think if it's in the job description, that's good, but I think we should connect the contract to the job description, which might be a more still effective but a little softer way to make that clear that that's an expectation that is part of the contract, given our history.
We can, what we could do is in that duties, we can make a reference to the job description. And then actually, I think would be a good idea, now that you're mentioning that, I'll shoot that out to everybody too, so.
Good. Any further conversation on contracts? Oh, Member Oswald.
Did I miss it?
Once we approve this contract, what's the date that she's going to start?
Right now, it looks like we are working towards October 8th.
That's number 4.
Superintendent.
I will say that although her official start date is October 8th, she's already been working. She spent the weekend going over the levy numbers that just came out on Friday at 4:30 and was emailing us with her review of those, and she's going to continue working with us prior to her official start date. We are very excited to be welcoming her aboard. As you know, she's coming to us from ARC and was one of the key people who were active in doing the audit process that we were just involved with. And I can say that there have been several superintendents from across the region who have contacted me, not very happy to be losing Kathy. And so we are thrilled to have her on board. She has, I do want to say that across the state, we are seeing a shortage of people in the CFO position, and schools are kind of scrambling to start school finance programs to try to train people for these positions. And more we are seeing CFOs that are working remotely from not even the state that they're working in. And so for us to have someone who is very close to us is pretty exciting. There is, you probably noticed in the contract, the ability for her to work remotely. And I think that, while she will be here, she will be housed here, there may be times that she's working remotely if for weather reasons she's not able to get here, or other situations as they arise. But we're thrilled to be welcoming her to the team.
Member Sanstad.
I noticed too that she's on the Two Harbors City Council, and so she's used to dealing with the personalities of elected officials. So I think that should serve her very well.
Member Oswald.
While I appreciate her enthusiastic ability to start work ahead of time, I know that it also complicates things when we ask for corrections in her contract or anybody else's contract when she starts before she's approved. So I would hesitate moving forward with employees that you allow them to start working before we approve their contracts.
I just want to clarify, I didn't actually ask her to do it. She was working on the levy for 31 other districts this weekend and just ran our numbers and shared them with us because she was just that excited to do it.
Member Lafleur-Kemp.
Yeah, just a general comment. Would you pass on to the hiring committee? Thank you. We are, I think, very fortunate to get this depth of experience, and I appreciate the time that they put this summer into the hiring process.
All right. Seeing no further comments, we'll move on to updates. We have one update related to the paraprofessional pro assessment.
I'm happy to announce we will start offering the Parapro assessment test at the end of the month. Right now, our projected date is September 24th. Last week, we had 2 computers up and running, and IT was working on the other 2 on Friday. And I don't know the status yet of where they're at with those. But Adult Basic Education is going to be administering that for us, and they have set a date of September 24th as their first date, and then we'll start advertising and getting that out into the community, out to some paras who are subs right now that I know have been kind of waiting to take the test, out to all of our employees, and so we'll be working on that communication plan with Katie, and then also on our HR website and several other places. So excited to have that started, and we'll see as demand goes how frequently we end up offering the test.
That's great news. Thank you to you and all involved for making that happen. That's a big deal. Thank you. And Member Oswald.
Do you see other districts taking advantage of our testing center?
I would think so. We're in the local area here. We had discussed and are going to start out by charging you're allowed through ETS, the national agency, to charge a little bit of an administrative fee. So we decided to charge $20, but anyone who hires within us after passing the test within a month or so, because they might not be a job right away, if they work for us for 6 continuous months, then they would be reimbursed that $20, so that we would recoup from other areas that are utilizing our testing center and in that process.
I hope we're able to fill a niche that's from our area, because I know other school districts can definitely take advantage.
We are too, yes.
And I hope it can be a revenue stream, even if it's very tiny.
Yes.
All right. Seeing no other comments, that concludes the Human Resources Committee for September 2018.
Great, thanks, Member Gorham. We'll move into the Business Committee meetings, starting with we'll let our teams change places, I suppose, here. Yes, that's a good idea. We don't need a motion for that or anything, right? We're gonna, since we have a couple of folks who need to leave and we have a guest here, we are going to invite Steve to come up to share his presentation with us about the bonds. As long as we have a microphone, yep.
I'm sorry. Are you okay?
Yep. Page 61.
Well, good evening, everyone. Nice to be here with you again. Just a reminder, this process actually started back in January of this calendar year when we proposed the idea that you had 2 bonds that looked like there was some significant savings of refundings, and those dollars have changed a lot since January, and we'll kind of go through some of that here today as well. And so the 4 bonds we actually are looking at are your 2009A, your 2010C, your 2009B, and your 2010Ds. The only 2, and I'm looking at that first page that's on the screen right now, that we're recommending that you refund because there's positive savings are the first 2, 2009A and 2010C. But we'll look at the others just to let you know that we're trying to be as efficient as possible if there are refunding or if there are savings for bonds to be refunded that they're at least being followed and looked at. Thanks, Bill. So first we'll look at the 2009A. Those are Build America bonds. And they have a current refunding effective February 1st of 2019. After you make your payment on February 1st of 2019, there still will be about $45 million, almost $600,000 of debt left on those bonds before they would be paid off, and that'd be 9 more years. So our what a refunding is we're taking that almost $6 million, and instead of paying the current interest rates that you have on those bonds, is refunding them with lower interest rates, just based on what the timing of the market is. So the total principal you're paying is going to remain the same, but the interest that your taxpayers will have to pay on it will be less. Those bonds do receive almost $3 million of federal subsidy that's remaining on the outstanding part of that debt. All the figures that I'm showing you today account for you not receiving those federal subsidies. So the net savings, are counting that 4.2 that you're not going to get from the federal government. Right now, those Build America bonds are taxable bonds. They will be sold as tax-exempt debt as we go forward. Then when we look at the estimated net savings, I just want to point out, originally back in January when we initially showed the district these numbers, the savings were in excess of $1 million. When I came to your board in April of this calendar year, the estimated savings at that time had been reduced significantly, just under $600,000. $597,000 was the number that we thought you would save at that point in time. And it's just because of market movement, where are interest rates going. So as of 2 weeks ago, that number that's printed there, the estimated savings jumped up again to $960,000. And now I'll give you an update as of last Friday. The number is reduced some, so that's down to about $834,000 now. As we go forward, you'll see that our intent is to actually price these bonds or sell them on October 3rd. That's our estimated date at this point in time. So what could happen between now and October 3rd? Oh, am I confusing you? Okay. So what could happen between now and October 3rd is really just subject to the market. You just see how quickly things can, move up or down. The average savings for that $960,000 equates to just under $107,000 a year, and that would be annually for the next 9-year period of time. I guess the best way for me to explain it is that when you do your levy, when the board approves your levy in December here of 2018, so for the taxes that you're going to collect in 2019, if you refund these bonds, and these numbers are, what I'm telling you they could look like, you would end up collecting $106,000 or levying $106,000 less in your debt service fund from all, collectively the taxpayers in the Duluth School District to pay off that 1 year's worth of debt. And then that'd be about the average for the next 8-year period of time after, next year as well. So does everybody follow me there? I'll stop because the rest of the presentation is going to look very similar as we go for the second one.
I just have a question about the refund with the tax-exempt COPs. What is the implication if we lose those federal subsidies?
I'm sorry, the implication
is
if you
there an implication if we lose those federal subsidies?
No, you just lose those dollars, but it's just a financial equation so that the interest rate that you're going to gain, the lower interest rate, more than offsets that $4.2 million that you're receiving from the federal government.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So your net savings includes losing that $4.2 million.
Got it.
That's part of the equation. Your taxes will be better off by that $960,000, or my new revised number, $834. But okay, are we clear?
834 and 934.
Okay, so what the dollar amount that's in this presentation is $960,000, and that was 2 weeks ago rates. Last Friday's rates, so I modified things because that's what went into your board packet.
Yep.
Would now be $834,000.
Okay, I heard 934 earlier. Member Sanstead?
Yeah. In prior years when we've done this, we've had it. There's an aspect of this where we have our bond rating evaluated.
Yes.
Would that be a part of this?
Yes.
And so it would be new go around, but the same sort of here's your bond rating and then the press that's accompanied with that.
Yes, and ironically, and truly this is just irony, when you had your bonds rated last time, you received from Moody's, the rating company, a BA1 rating with a negative outlook. Now, when a rating company assigns you a negative outlook or even a positive outlook, they come back usually within a year and review your bonds again. It's called a surveillance call. How are things going? So whether or not you're issuing new bonds or not, they're updating their information to see if they can remove that negative or change the positive or whatever. And that's, again, for the purpose of giving the public the best information of people who might be buying your bonds on the secondary market.
So are you saying...
What's that?
When is that going to happen?
That just happened about a month ago.
Okay.
So at that point in time, they didn't know you were issuing new bonds or the possibility. So they just reaffirmed that existing BA1 rating. But our schedule, and actually it's on the future page here, is we are going to have a rating call in 2 weeks from now, and they'll go through the process again. Now, since they just went through the process a month ago, the updated call is just going to be kind of asking for some better information as far as, for instance, when we had our call last month, it was, what's your estimated enrollment for the start of this school year? So Peggy was on that call Peggy moved, and was gave that estimated number. But now, since our call will be in 2 weeks from now, we'll actually have a better enrollment number. So they'll ask for some different information like that. But the time spent on this next call will be very brief compared to what it normally is, just because you just went through it again.
And so, would it be fair to say, in your expertise, that likely the outcome would be the same as it is now?
The rating? Yes. Very likely. And that's taken into effect. Your current rating, or what we believe your current, well, we already know what your current rating is, but what we believe the rating will be affirmed at is taken into account as far as what we think you'll get when you go to market on these bonds.
So if we held off for a month on these and went out for refunding in November or December, is that a possibility? And I presume that the only implication would be that we'd still be at the mercy of the market in terms of what our savings would be.
So to answer your question, yes, you can go out any time. You can't go out too early, actually, but you can always go out later. So part of the resolution that's in this packet as well is that you're giving us authority through Northland Securities is going to be the one who's going to purchase your bonds. And we have between your next Tuesday's board meeting date and December 31st to get that done. Now, collectively, we're working with Northland to select the right day to price those bonds. And if October 3rd does not seem to be the right day, we could go in November, we could go in December through December 31st, because that's the authority you're giving us. So the only reason we would wait, though, honestly, that I can think of is if the market's not cooperating or something drastic happened that's really making the market unsure of why you wouldn't sell your bonds now. Because if you can achieve savings of, let's say, $800,000, you don't want to give up that $800,000 betting that the market's going to be better in December and then come back here and only have savings of $700,000 when you could have achieved savings of $800,000, if that makes sense. Now, if you're trying to put together the rating is not going to improve between now and December. Unfortunately, the way kind of ratings work is if you have a rating that's not exactly the strongest, which Duluth currently has, not the strongest rating, it could get worse. I don't see that happening because we just had the call. And so based on the information, I don't see that getting worse. It's going to take a couple of years of consistent financial information of improvement for a rating company to actually better your rating. It goes south in a hurry. It doesn't go north very fast. So it's certainly not going to go north in a couple of months. I mean, if we waited now until December.
Sure. My concern is...
Go ahead, sorry.
Thank you. My concern is the perspective as a district, if we are choosing to go after this and do another bond call and then have the publicity that comes along with that, potentially a month ahead of a levy where we're asking for more money from citizens, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And so if we postpone this and you're moving your call on the bond rating till after the election, that would perhaps be a smarter move district-wide, but perhaps the cat's out of the bag here anyway.
Yeah,
so.
and I'd be interested in, and, members can certainly have their opinion on, what you think is most important, and I certainly respect that. I will say that the rating that just happened a month ago is a public rating, and there was a press release associated with that. Whether or not that made any political splash locally, I don't know, but that was a public rating and is out there for the public to look at. The good news, and I guess you just have to weigh, A versus B, is that you also have the option to have press that, the district has saved $1 million on, future debt. So, it depends how the headline's written, I suppose, or how you communicate, that's, in my mind, that's a very valid point. Again, I appreciate your comments, and so what you are doing by waiting because of the rating, so to speak, is potentially sacrificing a higher amount of savings for something. It could go higher too, though. I'm not saying that it couldn't be better in December. I'm not telling you that. I don't know. But if you do know now that you could achieve, $900,000 worth of savings, and then in December it's only $700,000, then you missed an opportunity there. So, but those are good points for discussion. Okay.
One last follow-up.
Yep.
So the last line here is the present value savings of $829,000, yep. And there's a 1.775%. And so I know you're talking about $835,000, is that the number? Which then is definitely going to be under 3%. And so that is a change. Under statute, previously we had to have 3% savings, but we don't anymore. Is that correct?
You've got half of it kind of right.
Okay.
I understand if you don't do this, things get really complicated. If you do what's called an advanced refunding, so you're advancing before the call date, by state law you have to achieve 3% savings. And the reason for that is because usually the closer you get to a call date, the greater amount your savings are. And so the state doesn't want you arbitrarily refunding before you get to that call date, giving up, some future savings. Once you hit the call date, normally speaking, unless the market moves incredibly, your biggest savings are at the call date because there's that much left of your bonds to refund. Every year that you go by paying the existing interest rate that you currently have on them means there's less opportunity for you to refund. There's this because you've already paid principal and interest for that next year. So normally speaking, most districts, if they qualify, meaning if the numbers work, they're going to refund as close to the call date as possible. And so this, by refunding here prior to February 1st, 2019, which is your first opportunity to refund as a callable debt, is likely your greatest opportunity to receive the most amount of savings. Okay, and I almost sometimes weigh whether or not I should put that present value number down there. The present value number is just a state calculated figure that when we talk about present value savings, it's a mathematical equation weighing the time value of money. So the real number, if we look at this report, the $960,000, if that was the right number, that is really the number that you will not collect from your taxpayers, which equates to a time value number of $829. But the real number that the normal public would get is that $960,000. Okay, we'll move on. The next page, just graphically or numerically, actually in table format, shows you how those numbers work. So your current, if we just look at that very top row, the current amount of principal and interest that you would pay next year on these bonds, if you do no refunding, is that $6,399,000 number. You would then get the federal subsidy, so this actually helps you understand how this all works, of $776,000. So the net amount that you would be levying your taxpayers is that $5.6 million number. Now, if we refund at the new interest rates, Your new net number is $5,517,000, which equates to that $105,000 worth of saving. And again, it's very similar for the next 8-year period of time after that. Okay, so then we just move on to the 2010C issue. Again, the same type of information. This is just a much, much smaller issue. So after you make your payments on February 1st, you'll have $2.9 million left of debt outstanding. If we refund that, according to this sheet that was 2 weeks ago, you would save $52,000. My revised number as of last Friday is $43,000, or an average of $4,800 a year. So again, much smaller, but there's no reason not to do this one at the same time because there's some economies of scale to refund both bonds at the same time. The next page just again illustrates that, just like the last bond, the only thing is this one's a little simpler because there's no federal subsidy involved. Then we look at, I told you we'd look at two other issues. Your 2009B issue, that's callable March 1st, so instead of February 1st, this one actually has a March 1st call. The difference on this one and the next issue that we'll look at is because they're annual appropriation bonds, they do not qualify for the state credit enhancement program, and what that means is for free, every district in the state can participate in this credit enhancement program whereby your bonds carry the state's credit rating. And that rating right now is a AA2. So the first two bonds that we looked at will carry actually a AA2 rating, and they'll have an underlying rating, which is a school district's rating of the BA1. These annual appropriation actually get downgraded one further step because they're not a GO bond, they're an annual appropriation. So they actually would carry a straight rating of a BA2, which is not a very strong rating at all, and therefore the interest rates would be much, much higher for you to refund these, and that's why they don't work. So if you really go all the way down to the very last bullet point there, this would show you that if you did do this refunding, you actually would lose $680,000. So that's a pretty easy thing to say this is not the right time to refund those bonds. And they may never be, but certainly right now you don't want to take action. The next page just shows you the table there. So you would be exchanging $2,700,000 worth of debt for $2,800,000 of debt, and that's obviously not a very good deal. So we would say don't do those. And then we looked at your 2010D issues, the same type of deal. It's an annual appropriation. It would not carry the state's credit rating. In this case, they would lose nearly $50,000 by doing the refunding. So again, does not make sense to do that. And there's the table associated with those. So then we have two resolutions that would be on your board agenda for next Tuesday, prepared by Freiberger. And the first one is to refund your 2009A bonds. That would be your new 2018A series. Associated Trust Company is the trustee. I'm pointing that out because you have two different trustees on both of these bonds. The company that I work for, PMA Financial, would be acting as your financial advisor. I told you already you have a contract with Northern Securities acting as an underwriter, so they'll be the ones purchasing the bonds. Anytime that, if the board approves these resolutions, anytime between next Tuesday and December 31st, we can go to market. And if we achieve a successful sale, you are authorizing any board officer and the superintendent to sign that agreement that those bonds are sold, and then I would come back to you at your next board meeting for board ratification. Okay? The next page is the exact same thing. The only difference on here is we're refunding the 2010C bond. That will be labeled a 2018B bonds. That's a new series. And the only difference here is the trustee is U.S. Bank instead of Associated. And that's just because of who the trustee was on the original issues in each one of those. Then the last page kind of goes through the timing. And there's two changes on this page that have been made since this went to the board. So here I am today at the Business Committee meeting discussing this with you. The rating call has been changed from September 13th to September 19th. So actually what will happen first is we're actually having board take action on the 18th, on Tuesday, before we have the rating call. Then we've moved the pricing date from September 24th to October 3rd, and that's actually one of the reasons the rating call was scheduled earlier, is so we could be set to go by September 24th. And just to give the board just a small bit of background, I mean, these are kind of our discussions that go into when we want to price the bonds. September 26th is when the Fed meets to look at raising rates, and it seems like they're going to. All indications are, but nobody knows until September 26th. So our original thought a couple months ago was let's get ahead of that and see if we can take possible advantage before the Fed moves rates. Our belief right now is everybody is going to be pricing that in, and actually before the Fed actually makes the move, they might be a little jumpy about it, so you may not get as good of rates if we price it like 2 days before the Fed's going to reserve, as opposed to the market calming down for a full week after the Fed takes the move. So that's why we're changing our strategy and moving it to October 3rd. If we do price the bonds on October 3rd or sometime prior to October 16th, I'll come back on October 16th for the board for ratification. If we price it after October 16th, then I'll come back at your November meeting for ratification, or a December meeting if it's sold in November. Right now, the tentative closing date is November 6th, so that means when we sell the bonds, the person who buys the bonds will actually deposit all that money that's required to retire your old issues on November 6th. You'll actually receive those dollars, and they'll be held by the trustee until the February 1st payment. And then on February 1st, the trustee releases those funds to pay off all the bondholders who owed your old issues. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
I just want to make sure that I'm reading this clearly, that the 2 bonds we're going to sell are going to relieve us of a bill to pay out of our debt service fund, and they won't impact our general fund as a lot more money in our general fund. It's just purely to reduce our bill.
Purely, yes.
And the other 2, if we were able to, that would have freed up general fund money, but we aren't able to do that.
Correct.
Okay.
You're actually able, it just doesn't make financial sense.
Right.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
That's exactly right.
I'm just hoping we can get updated calculations and dates before we vote. So when we get this in our packet for the meeting next week, can we have updated numbers?
Sure. It just will depend on what date you want me to update the numbers on, because like you say, every day that moves. So if I could get some direction on what day you want that for your board packet for next Tuesday. I mean, aren't your board packets for next Tuesday out already? Or do you just want like an oral report for that, or?
We get them on Thursday.
This Thursday. So we updated rates as of last Friday, so I could update rates like as of this Wednesday. And is that fair? Is that okay? Okay, sure, absolutely.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, can I just follow up on that though? So I'm happy to do that, and I will do that for you. I just want to be clear, board members, that when you vote then on Tuesday, don't get fixated on that number, because things can happen between Wednesday and October 3rd too. So I just want to make sure you understand that whatever number I send you will just be as of that date.
I'm actually more interested in just the timing and the timeline, so.
Okay.
Thanks.
Superintendent?
You mean to have this page corrected, right? The one that's up there?
Yeah.
That's what she was
Yep.
referring to.
I
Not so
understand
much the...
Oh, the timing page.
Yeah.
But you want the numbers updated too, or not? Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what, okay. Okay, we'll update the whole presentation.
Perfect.
Got it.
I was just going to say that this is a way for us to reduce taxes that people are paying. And so that's, while it doesn't give us a general fund saving, it doesn't give us money that we can turn around and reinvest. It does save the taxpayers money.
Any other questions? Great. Thank you for that
Great,
presentation.
thank you.
We appreciate it.
I appreciate your discussion.
Okay. Now we're going to go back to the beginning of the agenda, starting with the financial report. Peggy, is there anything of note that we should be looking at in the financial report? Microphone. Don't forget your microphone.
I just wanted to note that on the July budget changes report, you'll see at the top was the budget that was adopted in June, and then the first line was reflecting the changes that we made when ARC did their review. So, and then the other ones would be new grants that came in or carryovers. Other than that, the July interim financial statements are pretty standard, but you'll see very little activity because it was July. But other than that, everything else should be the same.
Any questions for Peggy? I think we can push this comment to probably next month's meeting when hopefully we have our new CFO here. But one of the things that we've talked about, and this came up last month too, was working on putting together a budget education schedule. So each committee meeting will be talking through different pieces of the budget, and Peggy and the new CFO will be kind of walking us through those. So maybe next month we can start putting a plan together for what that might look like. I did have one question. Can you just do a high-level overview for us, please, on the general fund investment activity report that's on page 18?
That would be the investment report on page 18. So we have Mintrust term series. What we have is at your beginning balance of what we have invested in what we call Mintrust term series. It's an external investment pool, and we do that through PMA. We can put in a large dollar amount, and as you can see, their interest rate at the time has been going up, which is anything over, when you get close to 2%, it's almost a record now. So these are short term, as you can see what the maturity date is. So we've been in May and June, we get a substantial payment from our county taxes. So we're able to invest those and until our interest payments come due at the beginning of August and September. We've been able to invest those for a short period of time, and getting those in with our, to earn a little interest rather than just sitting in our checking account. So that's where that money comes from, and then it will be used, as you can see, matures to pay payroll, our regular bills that come up. We do a cash flow analysis all the time to make sure that we have enough cash on hand to meet our payroll and our regular bills going out.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions on the financial report? Okay. Thank you. Moving on to bids. The first is a bid for bakery products. That's a lot of bread. One of the questions that I had, are there nutritional standards that are a requirement as a part of the bid, or is it strictly here's what we need and here's the price?
No, there are nutritional standards that are put out as part of the bid. They're reviewed by Pam Bowe, who is the head of child nutrition, to make sure that we're following USDA guidelines on all the materials, the food that they purchase.
Great. Thank you. Member Oswald?
Can you explain to me why the lowest bid wasn't taken?
There was a review by the head of child nutrition on total package price and the item price. There were ups and downs on both items. And then looking at nutritional guidelines and the history that we've had with delivery on time, that type of thing. So that's, it looks like we are accepting the low bid.
We did.
Yeah.
We accepted the low at 26.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I wasn't looking at the 8. I'm sorry. I was looking at both saying 26. I missed that it was 28.
That's okay.
But thank you for that. And is this a contract that we're required to take the lowest bid?
I don't think we're required to take the lowest bid on that. We can evaluate based on product too.
Is there a background? I know there's some contracts that we are required to and some that aren't over many different facets. Is there any rationale that I can use when evaluating these contracts as to whether a contract falls under required or not?
Statutory or law allows us to evaluate we have to solicit bids when we get to a certain level. So if we do solicit bids or quotes, we do not have to select the lowest bid as long as we have reasons for not accepting the lowest bid. And one example would be, I'm going to use elevator service. So let's say we go out for bids and Schindler is 100,000 and another company is 90. But company B, which was 90, we had numerous problems, people stuck in elevators, and we had documented that for an entire year. The next year we could say, we had these issues, we're not going to go with company B, we're going to go with a higher priced vendor because of the service experience that we had with company B, and I'm just making up elevators. It has nothing to do with anything, but we're not required by statute to take the low vendor.
And so when I hear from the community that they may have had a low bid, I can tell them that there were other things in the decision.
There's many other factors that go into selecting a low bid.
Because I think that's something in the community that is expected and isn't necessarily true.
And I'm not an expert in it, but we do buy a lot in facilities, and I know we don't have to select a low bid just based on money. There's many factors that play into that. Tony Kilikovich would be the best to talk to.
Great. Moving on to policies. Policy 701, the establishment and adoption of the school district budget. I have a couple of questions. The first is we have under Section 3 the requirement that the budget should be, the preliminary revenue and expenditure budgets should be reviewed in April. I'm wondering if there's, and I'd be curious what my colleagues think about moving that up sooner than April so that we can begin the process sooner. Member Oswald.
I guess I'd like some clarification as to what a preliminary revenue and expenditure budget looks like. Is that predicting our deficit or surplus numbers, or is that with cuts already identified, or investments? Because that would be, there's a difference in that with the work involved to get it done by June, so that's why I'm asking.
That would be with any investments or reductions identified. And of course, the final budget still isn't accepted until June. We said April because the legislative session is usually wrapped up before then. In years when we don't have a legislative bill on a funding year, it would be very difficult to have a finalized budget before April. And sometimes I'd say it's probably going to be pushing it for April and in some years, depending on when we learn about our funding from the state.
So perhaps we can maybe add some language about that we've identified our budget numbers, or predicted budget number by the middle of February or something like that, so we know we're working on it. Because in my 3 years on the board, I think we've gotten preliminary numbers in the middle of February all the way to March, and so it's always kind of dependent on a lot of things. But I would like to firm up that timeline somehow, if it's possible, so that we're not told that we have $4 million more, the week before April, at the end of March, and then get a budget that shows it that. I would rather have time to figure out what our investments and reductions are in between initially identifying our budget and the proposal in April.
Peggy probably has more to say on this too, but I would say that our budget, our whole budget is always based on estimates and projections and is a living, breathing document. So even when we say our budget is final, it's really something that changes and could change every single day of the year if we wanted to look at enrollments and where we were. And so for us to be able to say, we know what the federal government will do and we know what the state government will do and we know exactly what our projection enrollments are. I mean, every budget is our very best estimate of where we are in that moment in time. And until January, the year after that budget is finished, those numbers are still in motion. And so as much as we would love to be able to say on this date we are going to have solid numbers and they're not going to move, it's just not possible because there are so many variables that change from day to day to week to month with both state and federal dollars. I don't know if you have more to add to that.
I was just going to add that typically we have projected enrollment numbers usually by the beginning of March. And that's usually what drives a lot of our determination of how much revenue we're going to be getting in, which drives everything else as far as what do we have, what investments do we want to make, what reductions do we have to make in order to meet those balances and try to get our expenses to match our revenues.
Do you have a follow-up?
I do. I was just going to ask Mr. Horton what the budget timeline looked like in other districts that you've been in.
I would say that it's very similar to what Superintendent Gronseth said in terms of it being a living, breathing document. You're regularly reviewing things. Unfortunately, we're not in a system that says, here's the dollars and here's what you get. There's constantly money coming in and out, and there's adjustments that need to be made based on staffing, based on federal versus state funding versus other pots. So I think that school districts do their best to plan in the spring, but we continually see in districts I've served in and also in districts that you see other places that it changes, the landscape changes. So we try to be as planful as we can. Having gone through the staffing process in Duluth for the first time this year, I think that was a great opportunity for me to see some things where I had a lot of questions, and then after kind of going through it, you say, well, I guess it kind of makes sense how we do this, and the amount of effort and historical data that's really taken into making a shot in the dark, if you will, sometimes as it is to trying to plan and staff for that. The truth is that budgets are based on enrollment largely, and so until we really know what those solid numbers are, it's really hard to make a great prediction. Once I would say that the healthier reserve we have, the easier it is to make those decisions. And I think that's key. I think if we want to see stability in our budget and our decision making, when you have one additional FTE you're talking about, when you have a healthy reserve, that becomes a moot point. You say, we want to staff well, we want to do that. So I think building our reserve up is something that's kind of key in order to making that happen. And so when you ask what that process looked like elsewhere, the healthier the reserve is, the easier it is to make those staffing decisions and those budget decisions proactively rather than reactively.
Okay, thanks.
I know, I just wasn't sure if she had a follow-up.
No,
Member
I don't
Lofgren?
think so.
Yeah, I just, maybe you could review, Superintendent. I know this is our second reading, so I think we reviewed kind of the timeline in terms of where we got to April based on the process that you've used to collect input from the Quality Steering Committee, from different staff, and that kind of played into the April date as well, right? It was just a kind of process of getting input before we you produced a budget. So maybe you could just touch on that again. I think we did talk about it in the first reading.
Sure, I think you did a good job just right there. As we start looking at the budget, even we're already talking about next year's budget, but in November, December, we start ramping up, trying to figure out what kind of moving pieces there are. But that's also when we start meeting with staff and identifying our priorities so that they align with our goals, and making sure that as we build a budget, we're getting input from our QSC, our QLTs, during our Think Kids listening sessions. We're talking about what do we want to see as our priorities as a district. And so having all of those discussions does make a longer process, but I think that it makes a better process, and it helps us to focus our budget on our priorities and on our goals as a district. So as we set those enrollments in March and then update them again in April and May and June and July as we continue, we can keep those priorities in mind. So April seemed to be the best for an absolute deadline. Our hope would be that we would be able to bring it to you in March, and we would do that if we were able. But having April in the policy gave us a little bit more wiggle room for communication and for adjusting to any actions the state would take or federal government.
Do you have a follow-up, Member?
Yeah, the other, I guess, kind of timeline piece in my mind is also the staff time, because you're just completing our audit the end of November, December, and that whole process. And so our staff are very busy with wrapping that up so they can present to us as well. And so I guess always being cautious of our staff time and a timeline that also works for them, as well as, of course, the community input or the staff input.
Thank you.
Member Lofald?
Just to follow up too with our conversations, it's probably a challenge for school board members, and then place on top of that, my role as a new school board member, we are held accountable for knowing the budget. It's kind of the thing we heard in our community, door knocking, forums, but yet we have to trust that our leadership has to look at those numbers, has to look at that enrollment. And as much as, hopefully, as we gain more experience, although many of you on the board have been here for a long time too, through a budget process, but this was our first time this time, and it just seemed like we wanted more information. And so if we could try to give you an earlier deadline, but it really, if we give you or ask you for an earlier deadline, it's just going to make more work because it's not good figures. And so then we're basing things on it. And listening to Assistant Superintendent Horton, I also understand that looking at other districts to see how they do things, I would love to do that too, and that's one of my questions whenever I meet board members from other districts, but yet their district is different. And when we're tight with money like we have been in Duluth, it makes a challenge for laying out a budget. And so April is in our requirement here, and I would imagine that we will get updates before that if they're doable, because we'll ask for it, and we'll trust that we'll be doing the best budget we can.
Member Oswald?
I think that we need to think about how we can improve our processes we talk a lot about what we've done and how we do it, and I think all of our board members have expressed some form of, I'd like to see something different or something tweaked or something happen. And so my inquiry with Assistant Superintendent Horton is the same thing as the query that I'm going to have with our new CFO and her wealth of experience. And I certainly hope that we can come to a meeting of the minds on how we can move forward and improve our process. I think our process is cumbersome. I think it's inaccurate by nature. And, you know, Superintendent Gronseth, you point out exactly how inaccurate it is. And since they're based on projections, whenever you create that projection, whether it's closer to or farther from the actual, it's still a projection. So, you know, we can project any day of the week we want. Whether or not it's going to happen, you know, be close to the truth or not, it's still anybody's guess. So I think this is a more of a process question that, you know, I think our board is vested into creating something that works and is more transparent, easier for people to understand, and easier for us to communicate that we're doing the best we can with our community's tax dollars.
Member Gorham?
Yeah, I guess my perspective on it, two thoughts. Number one, I empathize with wanting to get this information earlier. There's a lot of stress as a board member in answering to the community, what we're doing with money. On the other hand, though, I feel that having advance information that may be incorrect, send panic waves into the community, is not what I want either. I want the most accurate, best information out once, so we're not going through this ebb and flow of, oh, the budget's looking like this. Oh, no, it's looking like this. Because that impacts the community, it impacts the employees who work here, it impacts a lot of people. It's a lot of stress. So I personally would rather work with the best numbers we can get. And I think setting a policy like this, I'm not sure what other members think. I very much believe that involving the folks who are most involved with these policies would be a good idea. So, you know, maybe this is something we table until we have our CFO on board to get their insights as well, and advice. Maybe there's something where we don't know here. I don't know. Just a thought, but thank you.
Assistant Superintendent?
Yeah, I just want to add a follow-up comment. A really good parallel, or a similar parallel, I think, would be the St. Cloud School District, in that they too are a regional center. They too have a extremely high underfunded special education, and that has had an impact during my time there. That was a continued point of discussion where we thought we were set, we thought we were good. And then we were back at the drawing board in late summer, and then all of a sudden over the summer we were in a different spot there. So that is a issue, and so I think, you know, I had mentioned, you know, the reserve is helpful, but underfunded special education is also a huge component in this, and that with better funded special education we can do things a lot easier and a lot better because of, well, how we have to currently fund that to meet our students' needs.
So another tool that we use for the budget, they're called what ifs, and they're put out by the state, and or we call them runs when they do their run on the numbers for the following year based on wherever we are in that moment of time. That's another piece that we wait on and we watch for, and when that comes, then we're able to move forward as well. And it's a way that they take any changes that are made in legislation, and then they run the numbers for all of the districts, and that's how they determine, you know, they're creating that information for legislators as they're having these conversations to know how much it would cost the state to do this. And so we watch those as they come out, and we can't really build the budgets without having those either, because very often MDE or the legislative researchers have to do a lot of digging in and making determinations on, well, here's what this formula would look like, and sometimes it takes a lot of experts to take those formulas they create to determine what our numbers are.
I just want to piggyback on, I actually I think Josh, or Member Gormy bring up a good point. The piece that I'm struggling with is we had processes in place, we had policies in place, we had requirements and data requests, and we still ran up at, we're just a couple months away from not having a budget that we were trusting in June. And so I think that it's beholden on us to learn from that experience, not that it's all encompassing of, but it happened. And I think that we need to be really honest about reflecting on how that happened and what our role in it as board members were, and figure out how we can support that not happening again in the future. And so I recognize hopefully that was a one-off situation, but even with everything in place, it still happened. And so I think that we need to be responsible to the public in ensuring that it just doesn't happen again. Member Lafleur-Kemp?
Yeah, I'm not in disagreement with you, Sally, but I do want to, I guess, remind us that the new CFO will have a handle on the timeline and the process, and she'll be a part of that discussion and laying it out. And yes, there were challenges this time, but I'll tell you, from serving on the board for 4 years before that, the process worked well, and it didn't as well this year. We all recognize that. So I kind of get frustrated when I hear we weren't transparent, because our committee of the whole meetings that started in January, like they have every year, were open to the public. We provided lots of information as the process went through from January till June, past years as well. And so I get frustrated when I hear we weren't transparent, because I feel we were very transparent and have a history of that. I look forward to working with the new CFO and her expertise that she will be bringing in to the process, and her ideas from working with school districts all over as well.
Any other discussion on 701? All right, thank you. I think that was a good discussion. Let's see. 702, accounting. I assumed 7011 was a part of 701. Is everyone under that same understanding? Okay, 702, any discussion there? Okay, let's see. Any discussion on the deleted policies? All right, so then we're down to 722, public data requests. I have a couple of questions. The first is on page, I think it's the last page. The data practices contacts. So it's page, what are we on, 35 here? I'm just curious about, under the responsible authority pieces, I understand that we have the chief financial officer by title because we didn't have a name in there, but I'm thinking we should do the same with the superintendent, because then we don't have to change policies if somebody were to change.
Yep.
Okay.
I think we even said that last time.
I think we did too, but I didn't see it in there. Or it's still on here, so if we can get that changed, that'd be great. Then I have a question on the viewing. Let's see. I'm now lost at what page I'm on. Page 37 with the data request form. So we note that there will be a cost charge to provide copies of public data. For the inspection only requested method, does that still require redaction? And if so, is there a possibility that may also incur charges?
It very often does require redaction, and statute does not allow us to charge for redaction services.
So the fees associated with copies is strictly related to the paper limits and what we're allowed to charge, correct? Or is that staff time also?
That is also staff time. So if the information does not exist in the form that it is being requested, and it takes staff time to create that specific data report, then that could be charged for if they were asking for copies. If they're asking for inspection, then you cannot charge for that time.
Okay. Or the redaction services.
Correct.
Okay.
And just to clarify, you can't the redaction services can't be charged, whether it's for inspection or copies.
Thank you.
They cannot be charged for.
Okay. Thanks, Chair Kirby. Any other questions or discussion around policy 722? Okay. Anything around the deleted policies, 108? Okay. Moving on to contracts. Voyager Bus Company rates increasing for 2018-2019. I have a question for this based on the CPI on page 43. Am I to understand that because they're a company based out of the Twin Cities, we in Duluth are being charged comparable rates to St. Paul, Bloomington, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Bloomington?
I think it's because we are a city of the first class.
Okay.
Is that correct, Peggy?
I believe so. I also think that if you took the local CPU, it'd be very similar.
Okay. Even with labor? I thought I saw that on here. Labor and some things like housing and...
The initial contract must have been written with that CPI adjustment in it, and that's how it's based on. I mean, we can write it with any CPI, but the letter states that it will be CPI Minneapolis, St. Paul, so I'm thinking that's how Ken initially wrote that document.
Okay.
Because this is an extension, so it has to follow the original agreement, our original bid. So that information was contained in that bid document, that we would follow the CPI Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Do you know why?
I've seen bids that say the regional upper Midwest. I don't know if there really is one for Duluth. I don't think we're contained as a entity. I think we're more broad with upper Midwest or upper Minnesota. It's more of a Tony question, but I don't really get into that a lot.
Okay.
Do you know, Peggy?
I don't know for sure, but I think Dave is correct in that in calculating CPU and CPI numbers, they look at a regional area or a large metropolitan area rather than focusing. It would take a lot more work to try to find one just specific to Duluth.
Okay. Member Oswald. Thank you.
On page 44, in the middle of the page, there's a number circled with an arrow on it. Does that have any significance to us of the 1.9 for all items, less food or less energy?
I don't know the significance of the circle and the arrow.
Okay.
I don't either, but I can ask and find out.
Thank you.
Someone was Googling. I'm sorry.
Any other questions on that? Okay, moving on to the lease agreement with Lakewood.
This is actually the first official lease with Lakewood Little Lynx Preschool. In doing some research, there were preliminary conversations several years ago to establish a lease, and actually we had a canceled check for $1, showing that they had paid $1 for a lease, but there was never any school board action to do this lease. And so we spent some time together working through this and recognized they're no longer a Montessori program, but more of a private preschool type program, much like we run in community ed. And we wanted to recognize that there was some use of energy for lights or for cleaning or what have you. And so we did put a nominal charge in there, and they will be paying $450 a year, recognizing the energy that goes into maintaining the space as well. They were very interested in having discussions about transitioning into one of our Duluth preschool program, and so we're going to continue our conversations with that. There would be a lot of benefits for both their families and for us. So we'll continue that conversation, but in the meantime, we have a lease in place.
Which is great, thank you. So if they're no longer a Montessori school, then we probably want to change that on Article 21 as to the leasee. It's on page 55. It specifically calls out the Montessori school director.
I thought we had caught all of those. Thank you.
That's the only one I saw. And then the other question I have is specific to Article 16, default. I don't see any financial remedies in place there for us. Should there be a default, for example, if they utilize the premise for any immoral practices? Is there any thought in there around financial remedies for default?
We could probably talk more about that.
There's financial restitution language in here should property be destroyed or be damaged, but I'm just wondering if we want to protect ourselves financially, should they do something that then leaves us with a space there with money that we were counting on that we wouldn't have access to, should they just abruptly leave within the 10 days that is indicated in that section.
Okay.
Just a thought. I don't know if it's standard with other leases, but, well, I know it, like for renters it is, but.
Right.
Just to protect the district.
I just need to learn a little bit more about that.
Okay. Member Oswald?
I was just curious how many kids take advantage of this program and the length of time. Are they just during the school year, or do they do something in the summer?
No, it's just during the school year. And I believe there's between 15 and 20 students a year. There's a foundation that the monies that families pay for the service go to the foundation. Foundation provides teachers with some classroom monies and also goes to scholarship some of the students.
Will there be any challenge to incorporating them into our Duluth preschool model?
No, I think we would be able to partner again with Head Start and have a program there in the future. The benefit to families is that our services are free and transportation becomes a possibility. And the downside is the foundation wouldn't then have that support. And so there's a balance.
Is there or how long have they been operating at Lakewood, and do you have any idea how this began without us knowing about it?
It was about 10 years ago. We did know about it. There was a former principal there wanted to start a foundation and started a foundation, and the foundation then started preschool, thinking that because Lakewood didn't have a preschool there, because they're outside the city limits, we were limited on what could be there. And so that is why the Y started after school programming at Homecroft, because they're not within the city limits either. They couldn't have Head Start because they're not in the city limits. They've since changed those regulations, and voluntary pre-K didn't exist, school readiness didn't exist at the time. And so they wanted to be able to provide a preschool at Lakewood so that students who started their educational journey there would more likely stay there, because some of those kids were coming into the city for Head Start, and then they wanted to continue at that school. And so it was one way of providing that service at that school, but so many things have changed since then that would provide other options. But it has continued, and I believe last year is when they were no longer going to be a Montessori school and switched over to a preschool.
Member Lafayette.
Was that because they couldn't find Montessori teachers, or do you know why they switched over? And then, but my main question, I just had that out of curiosity, but did we have any issues with them using our space that you needed to address when you sat down? I don't know what those might be. I just was wondering if there were any issues that had came up over the years. Yeah.
No, it's been a positive relationship for a number of years. I know that they've changed rooms since they initially began. They were in one of the larger rooms, and now they're in one of the smaller rooms. And so we had to address some of the square footage things. But otherwise, it's been a very positive relationship. And since they have changed to the preschool, and it is a new teacher, they've had a very positive reaction, and families like the programming better, and so their numbers have been growing.
Well, I hope we really pursue working with them to be wrapped around our programs. So,
okay, moving on to acceptance of donations. Any discussion or questions? Any questions on the resolution for the maximum levy certification?
I feel like perhaps we should say a word or two about that.
I think that's a good idea.
Jump in, Peggy.
We are required by the state of Minnesota to have a certified levy by the end of September, which requires us to certify. That's why they call it certified to the max, which is the maximum amount allowed by law, which even though the final certification isn't due until December, there's many changes up and down. So when you certify to the max, that allows those changes to occur without having to go back to the board and recertify every single time you make a change. The levy document was just posted by the state of Minnesota last Friday night. So all of the numbers are not finalized yet. In fact, it shows right now, it shows a big reduction because of the expiration of the referendum. So these numbers will be changing and change dramatically, hopefully, after the vote in November occurs. So that's the purpose for certifying to the max in September. It's just to fulfill that state requirement of having a certification by September 30th.
So Peggy, just to clarify, thank you for that explanation. I appreciate it. So the max, is that max based on state statute or max based on voter approved?
State statute and voter approved at the time. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So there's several different categories within all of those, and they can all be adjusted between now and December. And so while one may be going up, another may be going down. LTFM is within that, debt service, youth services, student safety, there's several categories. And so the biggest variable right now is the referendum piece. And so we really won't know what those final numbers are until December. The majority of school districts in the state do certify to the max every September. It's kind of a yearly thing, and it's more the norm than the exception that school districts would certify to the max.
Okay. Any additional questions on that piece? All right, we did the PMA presentation, so moving on to expenditure contracts. Any questions? Pretty straightforward. Oh, Member Lafleur.
I just had a quick question on the St. Louis County Public Health transportation of students in foster care. Do you know how many students about we transport that are in foster care across the district, and is that separate then? Yeah. And I know it's changes all the time, but I just was curious.
I'm sorry, I really don't have a number for you.
I can add a little bit of information for that. So this is something that's on the newer side for us, and we're still kind of figuring out. So we're very much in exploratory phase. Principal Sheldon is taking the lead on that right now and has done a little bit of work at the start of the year. So there's been a couple so far this year. We're not exactly sure what this is all going to entail. So we're currently doing a time and effort on this to determine how much time and energy is needed to do this, and then we'll be allocating resources appropriately to meet the needs of that program.
I'm glad we're doing it.
Superintendent?
I do want to add one other piece, and that there is statute that says that if a student is attending one school and then enters foster care, but that foster home is in another school boundary, that they can continue at the school where they started. And that is where this piece comes in. It's that transportation. It's not necessarily all students who are in foster homes, but those that are living outside of their home school attendance area.
Thank you. Member Oswald?
Did you have something? Okay. I was looking at the contract for Phyllis Hauk on page 92. In the Roman numeral 2, description of work to be provided by contractor, it says the contractor shall provide ISD 709 with professional services set forth in Exhibit A. I was just looking for Exhibit A. I can't find it.
Is it?
If someone could find that, I'd really appreciate that and be able to read it.
I'll research that and get that up.
Good catch. Assistant Superintendent, did you have something you wanted to say earlier?
Nothing much. It was just I was going to add that in a partnership with the county, I believe that they cover 50% of the cost of that transportation fee when we are transporting those students. So it's a partnership with the county.
That's great information. So are we confident that that's the case? That the county pays for half of it?
99.9999, yes.
All right. If it turns out that that's different, would you give us a heads up, please? Yes. I think that's great, though. It's a good partnership. Another great partnership with the county. Any other discussion around those contracts? How about the no-cost contracts signed? I have one, I think. I'm hoping this is in the same area. Yes. Let me triple check here. Around the partnership, yep, it is, with the library system. First of all, I think it's fantastic. I think it's really an outstanding example of what really smart, dedicated people do when they put their heads together. Just a process question around that. Is there a reason we had to sign a separate contract for every school? Is there a way we can wrap that into one master service agreement or one master contract?
We asked the same question, and there was a requirement for us to have those for every school. I can't remember what the reasoning was, but I had asked as well if we could have just one, and the answer was nope.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other discussion around those pieces? All right. Facilities management. Mr. Spooner, you're up. If you want to just give us a high-level overview, and then folks can ask questions.
Sure. The start of school went really well. When we don't get calls, we know things are going good. So we didn't get calls, and things went really good. Prior to school starting, as you can see in my report, we still have ongoing efforts to eradicate rodents at Congdon. I think we're probably 90% gone and maybe 10% left, but you can't crawl in a burrow and count, so you have to go on.
It's not advice. I don't think that's part of your contract.
So you have to go on what our contractors identify by tracks and by looking. I think everything is going really well. I think if I didn't tell anybody, if nobody knew there was anything going on at Congdon, nobody would have known. I mean, it's just everything is hidden. Nothing has changed. So that's going well. We are on the agenda. The entomologist from Guardian and myself, and possibly the superintendent, we're meeting with the PTA at Congdon later this month to talk about rodents. And we have sent out a lot of fact information, but we still will meet and we'll provide those facts again. The Hartley land sale is coming along. We're waiting for an executed agreement to come back, and we're working with Dan Maddy to close that sale. So that was approved by City Council 2 weeks ago. So that's proceeding real good. And the lease with the Hills is moving forward, and hopefully we'll have that back with any questions they might have, and the superintendent and I can finish that up soon. The Lakewood, Ordean East, and Lowell, the LTFM work has been completed in those sites. Superintendent and I also spent a substantial amount of time a couple of weeks ago with several contractors on the Denfeld plaster issue, and we've come up with some good ideas and good remedies for that. I don't know how much we want to go in depth, but I think we've got a good plan, and we've got that in the project for next summer, and I think we're on track to stay within budget on that. So we're good there. I'm working on getting a contract. I actually just received it today, but this is not until next summer, but the PSS track renovation. It's the time of the year when we like to get design professionals under agreement, so we have projects designed and projects bid January, February timeframe ready to go for next summer, so it's already that time of the year. We need to have a big thank you to all building operations people. All the operations staff did just a great job. I was in a lot of the buildings, not every one right before school started, but every building I went to, they looked perfect. They looked really good. So our guys really worked hard, guys and gals did a great job, and everything went really well and looks good. We've got a few vacancies we're working on filling. We filled Denfeld High School. We had a retirement there, and we had a retirement at Ordean East, which we just filled, and we'll be interviewing for subsequent positions for people that have moved up. And in general, that's the overview of the facilities report. If anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
The first is around the safety grant. Could you remind us what was written into that grant, please?
That was 15 grants. That were a lot of pages that we put together. I haven't thought about it. I mean, it was my 2 days of work, but our total ask was, I believe, about $1.8 million. And it was broken down into several categories. I don't have them all at the top of my head, but the main ask for the facilities were it's entryway security, everything from CCTV to voice and video communication to film on the glass, the ID badging system, the Raptor system, and there may have been a low priority item of building-wide CCTV, but I'd have to go back and review that.
That's a helpful overview, thank you. And then my last question is specific to, I want to make sure that we're in the right area here. The emergency response crisis management, could you, what are the next steps with the ALICE training?
Our Train the Trainer workshops are being held September 20th and 21st. There'll be 50 people trained in, and we have all of those people identified. Includes some district staff, principals, another staff member from the buildings, our school resource officers, someone from the sheriff's department because not all of our schools are in the city. And so then as we're doing lockdowns over the course of the year, we'll be slowly integrating pieces of the ALICE training. So it's not a one and done for sure. This is a process of implementation, probably over the next few years until we have it completely running. But right now we're just in the process of continuing to train people. As people are hired on, they're also going through the online training that happened during the staff development day. The response that we've gotten from people has been very positive. They feel good about it. They don't feel like they could go in tomorrow and implement, but they feel confident in the direction we're heading. I don't know if Jeff has been leading a lot of this work, and I don't know if you had more to add to that.
We did set some tentative dates for some things just in terms of the implementation process and our partnership with all of our building leaders and the people who have been working on safety both prior to my start and then moving forward based on the suggestions of ALICE. So what was recommended was that we would do a debrief after this. So we have a couple ways that we're looking to debrief here between now and our 2-day training. So we'll be doing that piece. And then we do have the 2-day training, as Superintendent Gronseth mentioned. After that training, we will have a implementation guide that is created by ALICE, and so we will be taking a look at that and saying, okay, how does this fit in Duluth Public Schools? What changes do we want to make to this? And we're hoping to get together in early October to have a conversation about that and what are some of those gradual steps we're taking towards implementation, what are some slow changes and thoughtful changes that we can make. I just had a call today from a principal saying, do we want to do anything different? And the message has been, as it has always been, we do not plan on making our first lockdown in the first 10 days look any or feel any different. It's first exposure is what it was in August, and here's what it is, here's what's coming, but we haven't made any major changes yet. We're going slow to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with those changes and that we can do it well. So.
And if I'm remembering correctly, we signed a 3-year contract with them, correct? So do they kind of give us year one, this is what you can expect and do in terms of training implementation, here's what's in year 2, here's what's in year 3?
I can tell you what the first 8 pages look like, and then they cut it off because I don't have rights to it yet. So I will hopefully get the remaining 100 and some pages. But the overview is something to that effect, yeah, that you would come in stages like that.
Okay, that'd be helpful to see just because, I mean, there's a piece in the paper yesterday, and it's something that a lot of families are asking about. Mm-hmm. And so once you have your rights, even if it's just bullet points, so that we have a better understanding. I'd appreciate that.
Yep, no problem. We are looking at, is it October 26th, 28th? I forget exactly. There's a staff development day in October, and so we're looking at that as possibly a place to do a little bit more. We're still in discussion phases right now, but that's something that we've been kind of eyeing to say, how can we maybe utilize some of that day to do some of these things, but nothing is set in stone at this time.
Okay, thank you. Member Lafleur-Kent.
Yeah, follow up to that. Is there an opportunity for us to do some online training ourselves as school board members, or a webinar or something that you could provide to us? And then I have a couple other comments, but yeah.
Yeah, I did send it out once, but I think maybe that was a trial. And so we can get you signed up with an account if you'd like.
Yes, because I think I do remember seeing that, but obviously I didn't do it. And
it's okay.
So I like the opportunity too. So a couple other comments about your report, though. The compost program, the food waste compost program at Congdon, what is happening with that in regards to the rodents?
We have a committee that's been established. The superintendent has invited, I think we have about 5 or 6 people, and we're working on developing criteria district-wide. We have come up with a set of guidelines for Congdon to follow if they should choose to continue food waste recycling in the interim until we get the plan developed that's going to be implemented district-wide. So they are recycling food on a day-to-day basis following the guidelines.
And are we working with WLSSD as well on that?
Right, they're a member.
Because they have a lot of expertise. Okay, just wanted to make sure. And then also wondering if you could suggest to Congdon that they invite the neighbors to that meeting you're having just for informational purposes. That might be good to do.
Oh, the PTA meeting.
Yeah, the PTA meeting.
Sure, I can mention that to Kathy, and I think potentially the neighbors brought it up to actually have it, so I think it's more of a neighborhood meeting.
Right, and I that's what I understand as well, but I guess just to make sure that piece isn't missing in terms of the neighbors knowing when it's happening. And
I do want to clarify that I reviewed everything that went out that Dylan put out, and we did a really good job of putting great information that was accurate and concise and complete. And a lot of people indicated that they didn't feel it was accurate, but I just want everybody to know on the school board that and district leadership that it could not have been better what we put out. We put out really accurate information. So we'll just reiterate that and do the best we can to alleviate fears and help people to understand.
yeah, and I actually didn't see it, so I don't know. And I have heard some positive, I guess, perspectives. I'm sure Member Kirby, that's his district, maybe has heard more. But whatever we can do to make sure, particularly the neighborhood is invited, and we're not missing that piece, that would be, I think, important.
One good example that Jamie Kopko, he's the entomologist from Guardian, put out one of his letters is that you can't compare dogs to humans, but as an example, he used a pet. And a pet can consume greater or less than or equal to 5% of its body weight of the poison that we're using, and that only puts the pet into a category of optional being observed. It's not even, you need to bring it to a vet or anything. So a 50-pound dog that was 2.5 pounds is 5%, or 40 ounces. And I think on the site at Congdon, we have like 28 ounces of bait. So we're not even, a pet could eat all the bait in every bait box and not even be qualified, or not even qualified to even be observed by a veterinarian. We're using the lowest toxic applicable bait for the rodents. And what most people don't realize is that probably every restaurant we go to has the same bait boxes in the kitchens, and they're everywhere.
Mr. Spooner. Yep. And
I'm trying to spoil anybody's dinner.
Yeah. Well,
that's we're all cooking tonight.
I appreciate all you've done around this, and it, as we've talked in past meetings, wasn't what you wanted to spend your summer doing either. But
No, Guardian can't tell us, but they said in many public meetings that you can go to many restaurants or schools or universities or wherever, but in Duluth and other cities, there are rodents everywhere. And we don't see them because they're out at night when we sleep, and they're in the burrow when we're awake. But, they can't tell us where they're at, but they say if you really look, you'll see them all over town.
Well, I was in Boston this summer, and I saw them there. So I certainly know they're all over. My last comment about your report, I just wanted to also say I really appreciated your recognition of our operations staff, and a couple of them are out here. So thank you for the work. And I appreciated that you highlighted that they were challenged with many programs that were going on and activities going on, and I saw that firsthand at East, where I spent some time this summer. So just please, again, from the board, continue to thank them for their work, and thank you folks that are here.
Superintendent?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump back to the committee that we're bringing together to talk about procedures around food recycling and composting. Our plan is to, one of the things we talked about is who's not at the table that needs to be at the table. And so our plan is to set some procedures down in writing and then come to the board with that for adoption of I don't know if it would be a policy or a procedure. Standards. But yeah, standards to be met if we were going to continue that to avoid infestation. I didn't want to use that word, but yeah. I also wanted to say that on that same topic, as long as we're on the topic, we have heard some concerns about the Condon Garden being used this year. There was some concern that because we had rodenticide on site, should we be using that produce in the kitchen and serving our students? And so we made the decision that for this year, the produce really shouldn't be used in the school and in the kitchen. And so while they've put a lot of work into it, I think that using the food this year just isn't the right choice. We're hopeful that next year things are in a better place and that we'll be able to use that. So I just wanted to throw that in there too in case you heard about it.
Thank you. And I actually really appreciate, Mr. Spooner, all the communication you've done with us too around what's going on at Congdon. It's much appreciated. Last but not least, informational item around the sale of properties. I have a clarifying question. Mr. Spooner, you just indicated about Hartley that they were nearly complete, which is not what it says in this report from Greg, which I understand was 12 days ago or 14 days ago or something like that. But we might want to have it accurate.
We're talking two separate properties.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about the ones with the city,
we're selling to
not
the city
with
of
the.
Duluth,
Okay,
right.
great. Maybe the city wants to buy those lots. Okay. Any other discussion? This is probably our fastest meeting. Thanks, everyone. We'll adjourn.